The next one's kind of a combination of like two greats kind of come together. I feel like Frank Santoro and Dash Shaw.
Maybe the only collaboration in the
Childhood Predators. This is kind of this like purple tone throughout most of it, but then it gets to some yellow tones later. But obviously, like you'll see like that picture with the girl with no face, but it's kind of like a To Catch a Predator type of thing, and then it turns into like this kind of like runaway like convict type thing. I don't know. It's kind of like a neat little action story, I feel like.
Well, yeah, I mean,
kind of weird.
It's kind of like you could put this one in the horror category, too. It's kind of like their take on To Catch a Predator, like you said. Like, it's kind of like almost like they're adapting an episode of To Catch a Predator.
Yeah.
Where it starts out with this sting has been set up at this house that this, potential child molester is going to go to. But the narrative is split about half and half, because I feel like the second half, you're really meant to sympathize with the Predator character once it's revealed that this thing is happening, And I think he's only like 20 years old or something. Like, it's not some creepy old man necessarily. I don't think it in any way excuses what he's doing or that type of behavior, or is even trying to really go very deeply into commenting on that kind of a situation. But I think I read it more, if anything, as a critique of shows like To Catch a Predator, and the way that they kind of glorify victimizing these victimizers. It's not, you don't necessarily have to have sympathy for those people, but it doesn't necessarily make what the producers of these shows are doing noble or anything other than bullying. So there's some interesting things going on in this story. Also, really graphically interesting with the colors, as most things that both of those artists, Frank Santoro and Dash Shaw, do. So it's an interesting piece.
Then we have a Tim Hensley, just one-page
gag by Tim Hensley, which is funny, and it had a dark, humorous dark edge to it, so it fit in nicely with the volume. Tim Hensley's great.
And then Takeshi Murata has some interesting pieces here that have like that use a lot of like horror like VHS boxes in the frames, with these other like weird art things.
Yep. So this is, other than Robert Beatty's overture, this is the only other non-narrative piece in the book. There are these really super clean photos of these various bizarre still lifes. A lot of them, using old VHS tapes.
With cool like lighting and
as
stuff.
As well as a variety of other objects. Some really interesting, striking photography. And then, again, of course, he falls under a category of artists I was not familiar with before reading this. Again, I really enjoyed that piece. Kind of right in the middle of the book. So it was kind of a good, almost an intermission, I guess, if you can look at the Beatty pieces as the introduction and conclusion. You have this other non-narrative piece right in the center that could serve as kind of like a palate cleanser. So I enjoyed its inclusion here.
And I'll admit that I did not care for this anthology overall.
Really?
It was okay. Like, a lot of the stuff you just, like, I feel like kind of went in one ear and kind of went out the other. It was kind of... It was kind of okay, a lot of the entries. But I will say that Johnny Ryan was the highlight for me.
Yay, good.
And I usually do not like Johnny Ryan. So.
I was really hoping you would like it, because, of course, I love Johnny Ryan. Yeah. And this was my favorite piece in the book, too. And I was like, well, he's got to love this. This will convince him that Johnny Ryan is a great
The thing is, I've liked things that Johnny Ryan has done before, but it's just like the Prison Pit kind of turned me off. The comic book Holocaust was So I just haven't really cared for anything he's done for a while. But Mining Colony X7170 is probably one of the best like shorts I've like read all year. What's this, like another horror?
Yep,
comic?
Definitely horror.
Yep. Obviously very graphic and bloody and gory, like Johnny Ryan's known for. But he does kind of hold back for a little bit, like with these characters in spacesuits on. I don't know if it's like Mars or the moon or whatever. But basically, they go into this guy goes into this cave in his suit and tries to find this missing wife of his that's down there. And he encounters like a creature down there, and all kinds of like crazy, disgusting stuff happens, of course.
Yep, lots of gore and intense body horror and strange transformations of the type that readers of Prison Pit should be familiar with. Although it was almost darker, I think, than Prison Pit, because although there was definitely elements of humor in it and absurdity, it's so over the top. That you have to laugh at parts of it. I feel like you laugh less as it's going along. Like it starts out, it's drawn by Johnny Ryan, who for the bulk of his career has been a humor cartoonist. And it seems like this'll, probably be pretty freaky, but mostly maybe will end with a gag. But it ends on a very unnerving, disquieting, horrific note. Like it ends in a much worse, less funny place than it begins. So it's a very just kind of relentlessly cruel comic, but it is masterfully constructed. The suspense throughout the story, the drawing it looks terrific here. I feel like he's really grown as a cartoonist as now that he's doing these Prison Pit graphic novels, which I just absolutely love. I just think Prison Pit is just the height of where comics is at right now. And I think he's taken a lot of the lessons he's learned in doing those comics and distilled them here for this short, self-contained horror story. And it's just wonderful. And I agree that it's the highlight of the volume. And I think it is kind of the perfect representation of what I think Sammy Harcum was really looking for in the contributions to this particular volume of Kramers. We can talk a little bit more later about what Harcum's intentions were here, because this Kramers is very different than previous editions. But yeah, that Johnny Ryan piece, I mean, is easily the high. Well, not easily, because there's a lot of good pieces in here, but for me, it was my favorite too. I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, it was really good.
Can't go wrong with Johnny Ryan, in my opinion.
Alright, then we have Chris Silla's Secret Tours.
Who we talked about recently in our review of his graphic novel, The Heavy Hand.
Well, this one was a decent one.
Now, what kind of a story is this, would you say?
I don't know.
It seemed like it was going to be a horror story, right?
But it really goes into humor. It's kind of the ending is really weird.
It's kind of a twist on the tone of Johnny Ryan, and this came right after the Johnny Ryan story, right? These are both in black and white. So yeah, Sammy Harcum is a good editor. He really is. It's a really thoughtfully constructed anthology in the way that these stories play off of each other. Because this one, and it's so much about tone with these comics, but this one seemed to be something of a reverse of the Johnny Ryan story. I mean, they both contained a fairly consistent tone throughout, but in the same way that Johnny Ryan's story subtly went from humorous horror to really kind of pitch black, really pessimistic, brutal horror by the end. This seems as though it's setting up a horror story. This guy is a tourist, and this tour group goes to visit this town where there's this really odd temple, the significance of which is never fully explained or understood. These are all trademarks that we saw in The Heavy Hand by Chris Silla, which was a horror story. But then it turns into something different at the end, and it almost ends in a gag. Albeit a disquieting, disturbing gag. And it's
weird.
Yeah, and there's it gets very sexually explicit. So it was kind of an interesting kind of contrast to Johnny Ryan's story that immediately preceded it. I feel like both of those cartoonists, partly because of previous work they've done, kind of subverted your expectations, but in kind of an opposite way. Chris Silla, horror cartoonist, kind of ends on a more humorous note. Johnny Ryan, humor cartoonist, ends in some pretty bleak horror imagery in his story. So it was really interesting. I like both of those pieces a lot, and it was interesting the way they were juxtaposed here.
Mm-hmm. Good. Next we have Anya Davidson's Barbarian Bitch. I don't even know what to say about this one. It was kind of nonsensical to
You
me.
were really underwhelmed by this book. Well, this is not usually your kind of thing. This is the more overtly alternative stuff. But, well, Anya Davidson was the last of the artists that I was unfamiliar with before I read this volume. And I like Barbarian Bitch a lot. It was like a lot of these. It wasn't really horror. It was kind of like I guess you would say it's kind of like fantasy. I mean, it's kind of a parody of barbarian fantasy comics, sort of. I don't really, like I said, it's been a little while since I remember. I don't remember the details of the story a lot.
Well,
but she's trying.
I don't think you'd know it as you were reading it either.
Isn't he trying to track down this like troll character or something like that?
Something like that. There's like several weird things going on. Like there's this random part where like this woman encounters some tigers and she decides to kill herself so the tiger can eat. It's just like random weird things like happen in the middle of it. It's like,
a really bizarre, violent comic, bright garish colors. Mm-hmm. But I really enjoyed reading it. I guess I just like encountering these artists who I'm unfamiliar with. I enjoyed it. I don't know.
Good. I like the colors. Next we had The Ultimate Character 2002 from Ben Jones.
Oh, I love Ben Jones.
About these guys with weird, like, mutated bodies, like...
Yep.
I don't know, they have, like, normal heads and then they have dog head bodies.
Yeah,
and
Ben Jones' trademark dog characters.
Is that trademark? Okay.
Yeah, he always works with, like, all his stories were like dogs, like some kind of a dog will show up in his stories.
It's weird. I don't know, there's this weird, like, alien that comes in at one point and... kind of talks about the origins of the mutated bodies.
The California raisins are in it.
Yeah, it's a random. Like I feel like a lot of this stuff is just kind of random to be quirky. You know what I mean? Like a little bit. That's how I felt like with a lot of these. I think that kind of turned me off a little bit.
Like it was quirky for the sake of being quirky.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I know what you mean. I don't know if I see that with like artists like Ben Jones. Although I understand how it can come across that way. Mm-hmm. I think Ben Jones. I mean, he's a tough. It's funny in a way. He's like a tough artist to describe if people aren't familiar with his stuff. But in another way, he's very straightforward. I think, which is what I like about him and a lot of the artists published in Kramers and by Picture Box. In that it really isn't pretentious and it isn't really trying to be ironic at all. Mm-hmm. I think Ben Jones puts dogs in his comics because he likes drawing dogs, and he puts the California raisins in his comics because he likes the California raisins. You know what I mean? It's not, I don't feel like it's trying to be odd for the sake of being odd. I just think Ben Jones has a particular way of looking at the world that he expresses through his artwork, his deceptively simple artwork, right? He's kind of like CF, and then he's got a really thin lined style, a lot of white open spaces in his books. But I would say that there's not that kind of trying to be clever for the sake of being clever, trying to be quirky for the sake of being quirky. I mean, I think that's something that all the artists here have in common, and that these stories are really straightforward in the sense that I don't think they're trying to be like ironic. Like there's not really a lot of irony here.
He just wanted to draw the California raisins.
I mean, I really think it's as simple as that. That's kind of my take on it.
I don't know. I'm just like, I guess just from a writer's standpoint, I just like tightly constructed stories and characters, and there's this like you get more impressions in these kind of like works than anything. You know what I mean? It's just harder for me to grasp that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's more true of previous villains of Kramers. This one, I feel like, is more kind of literary.
Yeah, a lot of them are
focused.
actually.
They're a bit more meaty as far as like.
Well, the ones I like Johnny Ryan and stuff like that, definitely are.